Welcome back, my horror family, to Nakora Nights. Out here, in the frozen silence of Alaska, the cold isn't the scariest thing. It's what moves beneath it. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true Alaska horror stories, real encounters buried under ice and whispered about by those who barely made it back. Park rangers who saw figures standing in blizzards with no footprints. Truckers who picked up hitchhikers that vanished mid-ride. Families who heard knocking from under their cabin floors. These aren't legends. They're true stories Alaska tried to forget. So before we dive in, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because trust me, these stories hit different after midnight. If you're brave enough to stay till the end, like this video, subscribe, and comment below. I survived the Alaska dark. Now, grab your blanket, turn off the lights, and listen closely, because this is 10 untold most disturbing true Alaska horror stories. Let's begin. I never thought silence could feel alive. That's how I'll start, because that's what I remember most about that weekend. The kind of silence that doesn't sit still, the kind that breathes with you, waits with you, and listens when you're trying not to make a sound. Back then, I was working maintenance at a downtown office building in Anchorage, saving every paycheck for classes at the community college. I'd left the oil rigs a year earlier after an accident on the North Slope nearly took off 3 fingers. Since then, I hadn't been much of a thrill seeker. But my friend Leo Miller was the kind who couldn't stand still for long. He was an electrician, loud, funny, and always chasing the next wild idea. One night after work, over greasy diner coffee, he said we should spend a weekend out at Mirror Lake, a couple hours north of the city. Just us and a few friends. He said it would help clear my head, get some air, maybe catch a few fish before the freeze got bad. We were 5 in total. Me, Leo, his cousin Trevor, my coworker Lena, and her friend Haley. All of us in our mid-20s, restless, stuck between youth and adulthood, looking for something that made us feel alive again. We packed light, too light in hindsight. A couple of old tents, sleeping bags, and a cooler full of instant noodles and gas station sandwiches. The drive out of Anchorage started late, the roads slick with patches of old ice. Leo swore he knew a back route that cut the trip shorter, and for the first hour it was fine. Open road, trees heavy with snow, sky bruised purple over the mountains. But the deeper we drove, the thinner the tracks became, until the truck was groaning through slush and frozen mud. By the time we reached what looked like a clearing near the lake, the daylight was already draining away. It wasn't full dark yet, but the shadows under the trees stretched long and deep, and the air felt unnervingly still. Even the wind had gone quiet. We pitched camp in the cold, laughter, curses, the sound of fabric snapping as we fought with stiff tent poles. The fire finally caught, sputtering blue before it burned orange. Leo grinned through the smoke, proud like he'd built civilization from scratch. But underneath all that noise, there was something else, a stillness between our voices, like the forest itself was listening. The first night passed almost peacefully. We drank cheap beer, shared stories, and laughed louder than we should have. When the fire burned low, I remember glancing at the woods. Something about the way the tree line looked, too dark, too close. But I told myself it was nothing. The cold plays tricks, that's what my father used to say. The next day, Leo and Trevor went off to find dry wood, while I stayed behind fixing one of the tents with Lena. Around mid-afternoon, they came back with wild looks on their faces and said they'd found a path, a narrow, half-frozen trail that led deeper into the woods. Trevor said there was something strange at the end of it. We followed, of course. Curiosity always wins when you're bored and young. The trail wound through thick pine and birch, snow crunching under our boots, the air turning colder with every step. After 20 minutes, we saw it. A cabin tucked behind the trees, half sunk into the ground, leaning like it was trying to hide. Its roof was heavy with snow, the windows fogged from the inside. The door hung crooked, one hinge almost ripped free. Haley whispered that it looked like something from a ghost story, but Leo was already walking up the steps, boots creaking. He pushed the door open. The hinges gave a long, awful moan. Inside, it was colder than the air outside. The smell hit first, damp wood, metal, something faintly rotten. There was a workbench near the back, cluttered with old tools, not rusted. That's what stuck out to me. Some were sharp, shining faintly in the dim light. Others were dark-stained, the kind of stain you don't want to name out loud. On the floor lay a few animal hides, small ones, fox maybe, stacked neatly, too neatly. Lena muttered that it looked like someone had been skinning animals there, poachers maybe. Leo joked that the owner was probably just out hunting and would be thrilled to find us in his living room. No one laughed. Then Trevor bent down and pointed at something in the dust near the door, boot prints, fresh enough that when he brushed a finger across one, it smeared. That was when I felt it. A tightening in my chest, like something invisible had just stepped closer. We didn't stay long. None of us said it out loud, but every one of us felt it, that this place wasn't empty. We hurried back down the path, snow kicking up behind us, no one talking. Only Leo kept trying to laugh it off, saying it was probably just an old trapper's shack, but Haley kept looking over her shoulder, and Trevor didn't say a word the whole way. By the time we got back, the sun was a smear of red on the horizon. The fire was out, the air colder. We relit it, added more wood, and tried to shake the feeling that followed us back from that cabin. But as the night came on, the silence returned, heavy and wrong. No wind, no creaking trees, no animals. Just the snap of firewood and the faint hiss of snow melting on embers. Leo cracked open another beer, pretending to be unbothered, but his voice trembled when he said, "Ever notice how quiet it is?" Lena nodded slowly. Too quiet. Around 9:30, Haley said she'd seen something, a shape between the trees when we lit the fire. Tall, still, watching. She said it fast, like she didn't want to believe the words. Leo laughed, but it sounded hollow. I told myself it was just nerves, but then I saw it too, just beyond the firelight, half hidden behind the birches. Not moving, not animal, just standing. I tried to focus, but the shadows moved with the flames, and every time the fire flickered, it looked closer. Leo grabbed his flashlight from the truck and aimed it toward the trees. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just bark, snow, and silence. Then the beam passed over a boot, half buried in snow behind a trunk. The same tread we'd seen in the cabin. The light shook in Leo's hand. Trevor whispered, "We need to go, now." Leo said no, that driving those roads at night was suicide. The group split instantly. Haley and Trevor wanted to leave right away. Lena looked torn. And me? I couldn't move. I just kept staring at that darkness, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. It didn't have to. Hours dragged. We fed the fire until the logs smoked and stung our eyes, terrified of letting it die. Every crack, every whisper of wind made us flinch. And then, somewhere around 2:17 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling us just beyond the light. Leo swung the flashlight again. The beam cut through fog, and for a split second, something reflected, metal. Gone the moment he hit it with full light. A knife? A tool? A tool? I don't know. That was it for Trevor. He shouted that we had to leave, grabbed Haley's arm and ran for the truck. We followed. No one argued this time. We threw everything in, tents half-zipped, cooler spilling. Leo gunned the engine, wheels spinning mud and snow, headlights flashing through branches like strobe lights. The trees blurred past, too close, too fast, and every time the light flickered, it felt like something ran alongside us, keeping pace. Haley screamed. She said she saw someone, tall, thin, running through the trees beside the road. I didn't look. I couldn't. When we finally hit gravel, Leo floored it until we reached the first street light on the edge of town. We stopped there, none of us speaking, breathing hard, steam rising from our clothes in the cold. It felt like we'd escaped something we never saw clearly. The next day, Leo went back alone to get his truck and whatever we'd left behind. When he came back, he didn't say much, just that the tents were gone. The cooler too. Only the ashes of our fire remained, stomped flat into the dirt. And around them, a ring of boot prints. We never went camping again. In fact, most of us drifted apart after that. Lena moved to Juneau. Haley transferred schools. Leo sold the truck a few months later, said it gave him nightmares. I still work nights sometimes, downtown Anchorage, keeping an eye on the empty floors after everyone's gone home. And there's one office, second floor, far back corner, where I swear I hear typing late at night. The cubicle's empty, the computer unplugged, but the sound keeps coming. Soft, steady, like fingers tapping keys that aren't there. Once, I left a note on the desk asking who was working so late. The next night, it was gone. In its place was a single boot print on the carpet. Sometimes, when I take the trash out after midnight, I'll see faint light flickering from the trees beyond the parking lot. A campfire, maybe. Or something else. And every time, I feel that same breathless silence rise again, alive, waiting, listening. Because whatever followed us from that cabin never stopped watching. It just found a better place to hide. I swear to God, if I hadn't seen the sign for Fairbanks that night, I'd have thought the world had simply ended somewhere past the Yukon River. The fuel gauge needle was flirting with empty, and the road had gone from smooth asphalt to frozen gravel that chewed under my tires like bones breaking in the cold. The dash clock blinked 7:23 p.m., though the sun still hung like a dull orange coin behind the mountains. I'd been driving since dawn, my eyes gritty, the cab filled with the low hum of the heater that barely worked anymore. My name's Ryan Keller, 38 years old, born in Montana, a mechanic by trade, now working contract jobs across northern Alaska fixing snowplows, generators, anything with an engine that could still fight through the frost. I wasn't supposed to be out this far north, but I'd taken a side job. An old oil company needed someone to pick up parts from a closed site near Fairbanks and haul them back before the winter roads shut completely. A simple drive, they said. Half a day, easy money. I hadn't planned on my gas running low or my GPS freezing into a blank screen miles from civilization. That's when I saw the turnoff, a narrow track of road almost swallowed by trees. A rusted sign leaned at the edge, half buried in snow. The words had faded, but I could just make out Copper Ridge. I'd never heard of it. But the old-timer at the diner back in Nenana had mentioned a settlement somewhere this way. Said they still had working fuel pumps, if you didn't mind a detour down a road that looked like it hadn't been plowed since the 90s. I turned the wheel and followed that path anyway. The truck rattled like it might shake apart. Branches clawed the sides, snow spit across the windshield. It felt like driving into the mouth of the forest itself, dark, endless, pressing in on every side. After 3 miles, the trees opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was, Copper Ridge. A scattering of maybe 10 buildings, a church with a leaning steeple, a few houses, a small general store with 2 old gas pumps standing like gravestones out front. It looked normal, quiet. But not the kind of quiet you get in the woods. This was wrong quiet. Every door I passed hung half open, not kicked in, not busted, just left ajar, like everyone had stepped out for a smoke and never came back. Through the open doorways, I saw bits of life frozen in time. A TV flickering on mute, a rocking chair still swaying, a kettle steaming faintly on a stove. I slowed the truck, instinct telling me to turn around, logic telling me I was almost out of gas. I pulled up beside the pumps anyway, the tires crunching on the gravel. The pump didn't look promising. Cracked screen, tape note that said pay inside. So I climbed the steps to the store, my breath white in the air. Inside, everything was lit. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, refrigerators running, even a small radio whispering static. But no people. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the counter beside the register. The cash drawer was open, bills lined up neatly. The floor creaked under my boots. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. Just the low hum of electricity and something else, a faint vibration in the air, like sound just out of range. I left a 20 on the counter, went back outside, and started pumping gas. The numbers clicked up slowly, painfully slow, and each one sounded like a hammer hitting metal. When I looked toward the houses again, I saw movement, just a curtain shifting. Not from wind, there wasn't any. It moved like someone brushing past it from the inside. I told myself maybe there was someone still here, maybe they'd all gone to the church, I walked down the dirt path toward it, calling out again. The air felt thick, like walking underwater. Inside the church, hymnals were open on pews. The piano bench was pushed back. Sheet music rested on the stand. Amazing grace. I could smell candle wax and something faintly metallic. Then I noticed the organ still humming, not from power, but from air moving through it, like someone was pressing the keys slowly, just enough to make sound but not a tune. I froze, because above that low drone, I heard something else, whispering. Faint, all around me, not words I could understand, just shapes of sentences, rhythms of people talking low in another room. I turned and walked out fast. Back at my truck, I sat with my hands on the wheel, trying to breathe normal. The sun was sinking, painting everything gold. That's when I saw them, footprints. They started from the edge of the store porch. Wet snow melted into the dirt, leading toward the back of the building. Fresh footprints. Bare feet. I followed even though I didn't want to. Behind the store, I found a generator shed still running, its low mechanical rumble vibrating through the frozen air. Beside it stood a car, old, rusted, but recently used. Frost hadn't claimed the windows yet. That's when I noticed the tires. Something pale caught the corner of my light. I crouched down, brushed away ice, and my stomach turned over. Frozen into the tread were small white pieces, jagged, glinting under the beam. Teeth. Human teeth. Some cracked, some still with roots. Frozen solid into the rubber like the road itself had bitten someone in half. I backed away slow. Every sound felt amplified. My breath, the distant hum of power lines, the crack of ice under my boots. I told myself to get in the truck, drive away, but before I could, something else caught my eye. On the hood of the car was a phone, screen cracked, and it was on. One new message. The sender was me. The message said, "You're not supposed to be here, Ryan." My blood ran cold. I dropped the phone, stumbled backward. My own phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out, turned it on. No signal, no messages, nothing. But right then, a vibration buzzed in my hand. New text. It said, "Stop looking behind you." I turned anyway. No one there. Just the road, the houses, the wind whispering through the trees. I got in my truck, slammed the door, locked it. My hands were shaking. The clock on the dash read 8:47 p.m. I kept my eyes on the mirror. Something flickered in it. Not a shape, just movement. Then I saw my daughter's face, only for a second. Her hair the same, eyes the same, but her mouth was wrong. It opened too wide, stretching in silence before the reflection blinked out. My daughter was back home in Anchorage with her mother, safe. I knew that. But when I glanced down at my phone again, another message appeared, still from my own number. "Mommy, why did you leave us?" I couldn't breathe. Couldn't even think. I turned the key, the engine roared, and I tore down that road like something was chasing me. In my rearview mirror, I saw them. Figures standing in the middle of the street, dozens of them, unmoving, watching. Men, women, children, faces pale and blank in the headlights. I didn't stop, didn't even blink. By the time I reached the main highway, my gas light was blinking again, but I didn't care. I drove until I saw lights, a diner, neon buzzing, people inside. When I stumbled in, shaking, I asked the waitress if she'd heard of Copper Ridge, a place off the forest road, maybe an old settlement. She gave me a blank look. "There's no Copper Ridge around here, honey," she said, pouring me coffee. "Ain't been for 50 years. I told her that wasn't possible. I'd just been there. I'd seen it. She only smiled, sad and tired. "You must mean the old mining town. Burned down in '78. Whole place caught fire during a blizzard." Nobody made it out. That night, in my motel room, I scrubbed the tires clean before bed, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. Those teeth, frozen in rubber. And when I woke the next morning, there were footprints in the melted snow inside my room. Wet prints leading from the door to the foot of my bed. Bare feet, small, like a child's. And my phone buzzed again, a single text glowing on the screen. "You left us in the cold." I never believed silence could scream until that night in the Alaskan snow. I had driven long enough through storms to know when to pull over, but sometimes you don't get a choice. My name is Nathan Crow, 36 years old, born and raised in the cold edges of Anchorage. I wasn't a trucker like my father had been, not exactly. I worked maintenance for a pipeline company based out of Juneau, hauling parts, generators, and replacement lines up the narrow roads between outposts. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept the bills paid and the loneliness at bay. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. That night started just like any other, cold, empty, and predictable. I was heading south from the mining roads near Douglas Island toward Juneau. The route was slick, a long stretch of blacktop flanked by spruce trees bent with snow. The forecast promised clear skies until midnight, maybe a few flurries. It was 11:42 p.m. when the first flakes hit my windshield. Within minutes, the world went gray. The snow wasn't gentle. It came in sheets, thick and fast, swallowing the road, swallowing the light from my headlights. My wipers screeched across the glass, useless. The wind pushed at my truck like a hand trying to shove me off the road. The thermometer on my dash dropped from 12 degrees to -8 in less than 10 minutes. That stretch of highway near Juneau is quiet even in good weather, but that night it felt abandoned by God. No other lights, no other engines. Just the storm and the sound of it chewing at the metal around me. I slowed to 20, gripping the wheel tight enough that my knuckles cracked. My radio hissed with static, no signal, my phone, useless. I passed a snow marker, or maybe I just imagined it. Then the truck slid. It was that floaty, weightless slide that every driver dreads, the moment you stop steering and just become cargo. The back end fishtailed, the trailer tugging like an animal trying to break free. I had no control. For a second, everything went quiet. Then the world tilted. My truck slid sideways off the road and into a ditch so deep I couldn't even see the asphalt anymore. The sound when it hit was soft, almost gentle, like falling into a pillow of snow. Then silence again. I sat there for a full minute, just breathing, listening to the storm batter the sides. My headlights pointed into the white wall of the ditch, useless beams cutting through nothing. The engine still ran. The heater hummed. My fuel gauge said half a tank, enough for maybe 6 or 7 hours of heat if I was careful. I'd seen storms like this last 2 days straight. There was no chance of a tow, not in this weather. But I remembered something. An old maintenance shed, one of ours, sitting about a half-mile back. The kind we used to store salt and tools in for road crews. I passed it before the storm hit. The rule is, never leave your vehicle. But rules don't matter much when you can feel the cold biting through steel. I grabbed my emergency pack, flashlight, flares, water, energy bars, and layered up. The moment I opened the door, the wind punched me like a wall. It stole the breath right out of my lungs. My eyes watered and froze. The snow came to my knees, and it felt like walking through sand that wanted to eat me. The truck disappeared behind me in seconds, swallowed by the storm. What should have been a 10-minute walk took almost 40. By the time I found the shed, my fingers were numb and my legs ached with every step. The structure loomed out of the blizzard like a shadow with edges small, metal, half-buried. The padlock was old and rusted. 3 hard kicks and it snapped. I stumbled inside, slammed the door, and leaned against it, panting, letting the silence wrap around me. The flashlight beam cut across the space. 10 by 10, maybe smaller. Metal walls lined with shelves of salt bags and broken tools. But it wasn't empty. Someone had been living there. A blanket lay spread neatly in one corner, with a stack of empty soup cans arranged in a careful pyramid. A camping lantern sat on an overturned bucket beside a pile of swollen paperback books. Everything was too neat, too deliberate. I told myself it was just some drifter or worker waiting out storms like I was. But when I looked closer at the walls, my stomach tightened. Numbers. Dozens of them, carved into the corrugated metal with something sharp. Dates. Tally marks. Symbols. Next to some dates were small drawings. Vehicles mostly. Trucks, snowmobiles, even a ferry with an X scratched through it. And beneath all of it, 3 words gouged deep into the steel. They never stop. The wind slammed against the walls, making the whole shed groan. I turned away from the carvings, pretending I hadn't seen them. I found a Coleman cooler half buried behind salt bags and opened it, hoping for food. Inside were empty cans, car keys, and wallets. 5 sets of keys, all different. A keychain with fuzzy dice. A carved bone fishhook, a rabbit's foot. And the wallets, 3 of them. The names meant nothing at first. Gregory Holt, age 41, from Sitka. Rachel Keene, 28, from Juneau. Robert Dean, 52, from Skagway. Cash. IDs, family photos. You don't forget faces like that. A woman smiling with her mother. A man with 2 kids in baseball uniforms. People who weren't supposed to vanish. That's when I heard it. A scraping sound, faint but steady. Metal dragging across snow. It came from outside, near the ventilation grate, high on the back wall. I killed my flashlight. The scraping grew louder, closer, then stopped. 3 knocks on the door, slow. Even, not frantic, not desperate, patient. Then a voice, muffled by the wind but clear enough to understand. "I know you're in there." The words were flat, calm, like someone reading them off a page. "Your truck's not moving anywhere." "Not tonight. Not ever." My throat tightened. I didn't answer. The voice continued, drifting closer to the door. Others tried waiting it out, too. Thought someone would come, but the road's closed. They never made it home. The handle rattled, just once. Gregory lasted 3 days. He kept talking about his kids, showing me pictures. Rachel ran on the 4th night, made it maybe 50 yards. Had to drag her back, the scraping sound again. Something heavy being dragged just outside. Robert tried to bargain. Said he had money. But money don't mean much when the world forgets this place exists. My breath came out in small clouds. Then the voice leaned close, almost pressed against the door. "That your truck out there? Northline logo, right? Nice rig. They'll report you missing, but by the time anyone finds you, the storm will have buried everything." I froze. He'd seen me. "Here's what happens next," the voice said softly. "You can open this door and we'll talk. Or I can wait. I'm patient. Got a warm place not far from here. Generator and all. You've got, what, some water and a few bars? That shed gets cold at night, -30. Salt bags don't keep you warm long." He paused, then added, almost playfully, "Don't think about the vent. I sealed it. Lantern fumes will choke you out if you light it." My eyes darted to the grate. Something dark covered it from outside, cloth or plastic. 15 minutes, he said. "That's how long I'll give you. Then I make it uncomfortable." His footsteps faded into the wind. I sat there shaking, my brain trying to find a way out. The words on the wall flashed in my head. They never stop. Maybe those weren't warnings, they were confessions. I dug through my bag, found my flares. 4 of them. A folding knife. A folding knife. A steel chain hanging on the wall. The door opened outward. If I could time it right. 12 minutes passed. Then the scraping returned. "Time's up," he called. Then came the sound of liquid splashing against the metal walls. Gasoline. My heart slammed in my chest. "Last chance to come out," he said. "Or we burn this place together." I struck all 4 flares. The red light filled the shed, turning the shadows into living things. I kicked the door with everything I had. The storm caught it, slamming it open wide. I stumbled out into a blinding white world, holding the flares like weapons. The man was standing 10 feet away, shorter than I expected, wrapped in a park ranger's coat too big for him. His face was hollow, lips cracked, eyes pale like glass. He held a flare gun and a red gas can. I hurled 2 of my flares. The wind scattered them in streaks of red. He shielded his face and I swung the chain, catching his wrist. The flare gun went off, the round hissing away into the dark. He lunged, grabbing my jacket, trying to pull me down. His strength was wrong, jerky, desperate, like someone half frozen but still furious. We went down into the snow, rolling, punching, clawing. My flare hissed out between us, the smoke mixing with his breath. Then I saw it, his neck. Deep bruises, like rope burns, frost-bitten skin. His lips blue, his breath shallow but not from the cold. He shouldn't have been alive, he screamed, but the sound didn't come from his mouth. It came from somewhere else, deep and far away, like the mountain itself echoing it back. I drove my knife into his shoulder, pushed him off, and ran. The storm was endless. The road invisible, the wind carrying whispers that weren't wind at all. I don't remember how long I ran. When I finally saw lights, I thought I was hallucinating. It was the ferry dock near Juneau. I collapsed at the gate, flares still burning in my hands. They found me the next morning, half frozen but alive. When I told the state troopers what happened, they sent a crew to check the highway. No shed, no tracks, no sign of a crash. Only my truck, perfectly parked on the shoulder, engine cold, doors locked. And on the side of the trailer, carved deep into the metal with something sharp, were 3 words: "They never stop." That was 5 years ago. I don't drive nights anymore. I live close to the docks in Juneau now, where the fog rolls in thick and white every morning. Some nights, I hear ferry horns drifting across the channel. Locals say that on foggy nights, captains see ghost lights following them until they dock, and in the crew photos, there's always one extra person standing in the back. Other times, I swear I hear my name whispered from the hospital on the hill, the empty wing where they kept me after the frostbite. And when the wind moves across Mount Roberts just right, sometimes it repeats words that no one said aloud. They never stop. I always believed the cold couldn't scare me. I grew up in it, worked in it, lived inside its silence. But that was before Nome changed how I felt about snow, before the night the wind carried voices and the ice remembered footsteps that should have been long gone. I was 27 back then, a field medic working with a small geological crew outside Nome. My job was simple: keep the team healthy during long weeks in frozen camps, patch up cuts, frostbite, or the occasional broken wrist from a fall. I'd been there for 3 months when everything began, and even now, thinking about it, I can feel that same weight pressing against my chest like the air before a storm. The story really started the night I left camp alone. It was late March, the kind of night where the moon hangs pale and swollen over the tundra, and the wind carries more than sound, it carries memory. I'd finished a double shift tending to a miner who'd sliced his hand open on a drill bit. After cleaning up, I decided to head back to Nome to rest for the weekend. It was only a 2-hour drive on the ice road if the weather held. I told myself it would be peaceful, just me and the dark road ahead. The highway out of camp was little more than a frozen scar through the tundra, a narrow trail surrounded by walls of white that seemed to move when the wind rose. I'd been driving for about 40 minutes when I saw something ahead, a pair of hazard lights blinking steady and slow, like a heartbeat in the distance. I eased off the gas. Out here, people helped each other. It was what kept you alive. But as I drew closer, something inside me, a small, quiet part that rarely spoke, began to twist. The vehicle was an old pickup, dark green or maybe black, the kind you see rusting behind every second house in Nome. It sat half on the shoulder, half in the road, and its lights flickered weakly against the blowing snow. I moved into the other lane, rolling slower, already running through what supplies I had in my pack: thermal blankets, flares, a med kit. Then my headlights washed across it, and I saw a figure crouched behind the truck. Not fixing a tire, not checking the tailgate. Just crouching, pressed low like a hunter hiding in the brush. He was dressed all in black, his head covered by something like a mask or hood, his face turned toward me but motionless. It was the stillness that froze me, the kind that doesn't belong to someone in trouble. It belonged to someone waiting. I didn't even realize my foot had found the gas until the engine roared. I swerved back into my lane and sped past, heart hammering so hard it hurt. In the rear view, those blinking lights grew smaller until the darkness swallowed them. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe the person had been trying to stay warm behind the truck. Maybe I'd imagined the mask. Then another pair of headlights flared behind me. They came from the blackness farther back on the road, too perfectly timed to be coincidence. Within seconds, the lights grew larger, closer, and then blinding. My little truck rattled as I pushed the speed higher, but they stayed right on me, so close their beams filled my cab like daylight. I remember glancing at the dashboard, speed climbing past 75 and gripping the wheel until my hands ached. Whoever was behind me wasn't just tailgating, they were matching every move. When I slowed, they slowed. When I swerved slightly, they swerved too. Then they tapped my bumper. The sound wasn't loud, just a dull metal kiss, but it shot adrenaline through me like lightning. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. That's when the fear turned real. This wasn't a drunk driver. This wasn't an accident. They were trying to stop me. My phone was somewhere on the passenger floor, but reaching for it would mean looking away from the road, and out here a single mistake could send you sliding into a ditch and disappearing until thaw. I kept my eyes forward, the road winding through cliffs of ice that glittered in my headlights like teeth. Another bump, harder this time. My truck lurched sideways toward the guardrail, the only barrier between me and a 30-foot drop into frozen water. I yanked the wheel back, breath caught in my throat. I told myself not to panic, to think. Nome was still 50 miles away. But I remembered something from a survival class. Never drive home when you're being followed. Go somewhere public. Somewhere lit. Trouble was, there was nothing public out here. Just frozen ground and night that stretched forever. They hit me again. The third strike was enough to spin the back end of my truck. For a moment I was sliding, the world tilting sideways, tires screaming on the ice. I caught it just before the guardrail and steadied, heart pounding like a drum in my throat. Ahead, through the swirling snow, I saw a pinprick of yellow light, a gas station, one of the few between here and the coast. Maybe a mile away, I slammed the accelerator. The truck roared forward, tires throwing up slush. I flashed my high beams, leaned on the horn, anything to make the clerk inside look up. Behind me, the SUV, because I could see now, it was a dark SUV. Maybe a Tahoe followed close, too close. When the exit appeared, I jerked the wheel right. The SUV tried to follow but overshot, sliding wide. That gave me a few precious seconds to barrel into the station lot. I stopped hard right in front of the glass doors and jumped out, yelling for help. The cold hit like knives, but I barely felt it. Inside, a middle-aged woman looked up from behind the counter, startled. She didn't ask questions, just grabbed the phone with one hand and a heavy wrench with the other. We both turned to the windows. The SUV had stopped at the far end of the lot. The engine idled, exhaust rising in pale ghosts. It sat there, unmoving, for maybe 20 seconds, then slowly reversed and rolled back toward the road until its taillights vanished. I stood shaking so hard I could barely stay upright. The woman, her name tag read Donna, handed me coffee that trembled in my grip. She kept one eye on the window until state troopers arrived 20 minutes later. When I told them what happened, my voice didn't sound like mine. They left to check the road and the broken-down truck. When they returned, their faces told me enough. The vehicle was gone. No lights, no people, but tracks in the snow showed where two other cars had been. The truck itself had been reported stolen days earlier from Anchorage. Inside were zip ties, ropes, and what looked like blood on the back seat. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The next morning, Donna showed me something on the security feed. The SUV that chased me? It had driven past her station heading north 2 hours before I arrived, moving slow, like scouting. That's when I realized what I'd escaped. Over the next month, police found 2 more cases, both women. Both had been followed after stopping near fake breakdowns on the same stretch of road. One survived by locking herself in her car until a snowplow came. The other, they found her car abandoned 8 miles from where she called for help, phone still recording the wind. I stayed in Nome a few more weeks, but the silence of the tundra changed for me. Every gust of wind sounded like tires on snow, every glint of light on ice like headlights. Then something stranger began happening. It started when I was working late at the clinic one night. I was cleaning instruments when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Voicemail left, no message alert, just the static icon. When I listened, it was nothing but wind. Then a man's voice, distant, breaking through. Still cold, that was all. I hung up, heart pounding. The number traced back to a prepaid line, untraceable. It happened again a week later. Same voice. Same words. Still cold. I told myself it was a prank, maybe a cross signal from the storms, but each time, it came late at night. Each time, right as the wind began to rise, locals started talking about strange things too. A miner gone missing in a blizzard, his boot prints reappearing months later, fresh as if he'd just walked out of the snow. A snowplow driver who swore he saw a figure standing in the road near mile marker 42, standing still until his plow got close, then gone when he blinked. Nome had always had stories, but now they felt heavier, closer. One evening I stayed late closing up the clinic. Outside, snow drifted down thick as smoke. The radio warned of another storm rolling in. As I stepped out to my truck, I noticed something. Footprints. They led from the edge of the woods right to my driver's side door. Deep, fresh, perfectly spaced, but there were no prints leading away. I stood there staring at them until my breath fogged the air in front of me, trying to tell myself I was seeing things. The wind picked up, whistling across the lot like something alive. I got in, locked the doors, and started driving. Halfway to my cabin, snow began falling harder, thick flakes swirling in the beams. My radio flickered with static, then a voice slipped through. Male, quiet, almost familiar. Still cold. The signal died. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Same message waiting. I didn't listen this time. Instead, I drove faster, wheels biting into the frozen road, eyes locked on the dark ribbon stretching ahead. The storm swallowed everything, the headlights barely cutting 10 feet ahead. Then, through the blur, I saw movement. A man standing in the middle of the road. He wore dark clothes, head tilted down, snow covering his shoulders. I slammed the brakes, tires shrieking. The truck slid, stopped inches away. He was gone. Not walked away, gone. No footprints, nothing. My breathing turned ragged. I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or seeing something real. By the time I reached my cabin, I felt hollow, my body moving on instinct. I locked the doors, turned on every light. But the power flickered and died minutes later, leaving me with only the wind outside. I sat by the window, staring into the white. And then I saw it again, footprints. Fresh ones appearing in the snow, one after another, leading from the dark tree line straight toward my porch. They stopped at the steps. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just watched the snow fill them slowly, like the land was trying to erase them before I could understand what I'd seen. That night, the voicemail came again. I didn't need to listen to know what it said. Still cold. The next morning, I packed my things. Told myself I was leaving Nome, that I'd find work farther south where the air didn't whisper. But as I loaded the truck, I saw something by the door, a single boot print. Large, deep, rimmed in ice, and it matched the description of the miner who vanished months earlier. I left that day and never went back. But sometimes, even now in Anchorage, I'll wake to the sound of wind rushing against the window. My phone will buzz, unknown number. And before I can stop myself, I'll answer, just to hear the silence on the other end. Then, faintly, the voice. Still cold. And that's when I know it's not over. Because the road to Nome doesn't forget. It just waits for the next set of headlights. I always tell new rangers that Denali has two faces, one for the daylight when the mountains glow like carved silver and the air smells clean and ancient, and another for the night when everything alive seems to listen. I learned that truth the hard way during my third winter working alone at the Toklat outpost, deep inside the national park. The storms there can trap you for days, but it isn't the weather that gets inside your head, it's the silence that comes after. I used to think I was good with silence, but that was before that night, before the mountain decided to speak back. I'd been stationed there since November, mostly doing patrols, checking weather equipment, and logging reports for the research teams who came up every few weeks. I'd grown used to the rhythm radio check at 7 a.m., temperature readings at noon, final log by 9. There wasn't much to fear out there except frostbite and your own thoughts. At least that's what I believed. The first strange thing happened one morning near the edge of a frozen stream about 4 miles north of the outpost. I'd been following a set of snowshoe prints from a group of hikers who were supposed to check in 2 nights earlier but never did. The snow was soft and powdery, easy to track, and their footprints went straight into a narrow stretch of trees. When I reached the camp, all 3 tents were zipped up neatly. The fires were still smoking as if someone had poured water over them just hours ago. Their packs leaned against a fallen tree, untouched, food still hanging from bear ropes. I called out but got nothing back, only the wind whispering between the trees. When I unzipped the first tent, it was empty, sleeping bags still inside, warm to the touch, like whoever had been there stepped out just moments before. I waited nearly an hour before reporting it to base. The line crackled, then died, no signal that far out. I took photos, marked the location, and decided to follow the faint trail leading west toward the ridge. That's when I noticed something else. Another set of tracks running beside the hikers. Not snowshoe prints, not boots, but something larger and deeper, spaced far apart like whatever made them had a long stride. The tracks circled the tents once and then vanished into the trees. I told myself it was just distortion from melting snow or the way shadows hit the ground, but I didn't believe that even then. That night, the temperature dropped fast, the kind of cold that makes the cabin walls groan like an old ship. I made soup, logged my notes, and turned on the old radio just to hear another voice, even if it was static. Around 11:30 p.m., the signal cut a faint noise that made my heart freeze. It sounded like a woman screaming, drawn out and echoing, distant but real. I tried to trace the direction on the map, but in the mountains, sound bounces and bends. It could have come from the ridge or miles away near the glacier. I stepped outside, the flashlight beam cutting through the falling snow, but the sound stopped as soon as I did. Not faded, stopped. By midnight, the storm had rolled in heavy and the power flickered. The outpost generator was in a small shed about 30 feet from the cabin, and when it shut off completely around 1:05 a.m., I decided to wait it out until morning. I layered up, set the lantern near my bunk, and tried to sleep. I must have dozed for half an hour before a noise woke me, the sound of something tapping gently on the window. Not the wind, not branches, a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I sat up, the lantern light flickering across the room, and listened. Nothing. Then it came again, 3 taps, evenly spaced. I walked to the window, my breath fogging the glass. All I could see was white and darkness beyond. I told myself it was ice shifting, maybe snow falling from the eaves, and turned back toward the bed when I heard something scrape along the wall outside, low and slow, like claws dragging across the logs. The rational part of my brain tried to take over, probably a bear, maybe a wolf, curious about the smell of food, but it didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was too methodical, too aware. I reached for my rifle and flashlight, the beam slicing through the room, shaking a little in my hand. The scraping stopped. Then I heard footsteps crunching in the snow just beyond the window, slow, heavy, measured. One step, pause, another step. I moved to the front door, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the wind. Through the small glass panel I saw nothing, only swirling snow. I waited. The next sound came from the back door, a solid thud, followed by another. I bolted both locks, backed away, and forced myself to breathe. The storm howled louder outside, but under it I could still hear movement circling the cabin. Then something brushed against the back wall again, closer this time. I didn't move for nearly 10 minutes until the noise faded into the distance. By morning, everything looked normal, too normal. No tracks near the windows, no sign of anything around the shed. The sky was clear and cruelly bright. I fixed the generator, logged the storm data, and told myself I'd imagined it all, the way isolation can twist sound and fear together. That afternoon, I hiked back toward the campsite to check for the missing hikers again. I found something new about 20 yards from where their tents had been. A small black camera half buried in the snow, still blinking a faint red light. I brushed it off and saw it was a GoPro. I didn't recognize the model, but it looked recently used. I took it back to the outpost, connected it to my laptop, and waited for the battery to charge enough to play. The first few clips were normal snow, laughter, a group of hikers talking about how beautiful Denali looked under the winter sun. Then, around the sixth video, the footage changed. The hiker was filming himself walking along a ridge, alone, the others ahead of him. As he moved, I saw his shadow stretch across the snow beside him. But a few seconds later, another shadow appeared behind him, taller and oddly shaped, moving when he didn't. The man didn't seem to notice. The shadow followed closer each time he turned, like it was learning his movements. At one point, he stopped to drink from his flask, and the shadow stopped too, leaning toward him as if watching. Then the screen glitched, and the video ended abruptly. I replayed it 3 times, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light. But when I zoomed in frame by frame, that second shadow had fingers long, thin fingers that stretched farther than any human arm should. The rest of the files were corrupted. That night, the scream returned. It came from the direction of the glacier, faint but unmistakable. I grabbed the camera, pressed record, and stepped outside. The air bit my face like knives. The stars blurred behind fast-moving clouds. The sound was clearer now, like someone calling for help, but twisted, the pitch rising and falling like it wasn't made by lungs meant for speech. I raised the camera and pressed record again, but as soon as the red light blinked on, the scream stopped. The silence was so complete it rang in my ears. I called into the radio. No response. I tried again. Static. At 2:17 a.m., something hit the back door hard enough to rattle the lantern on the table. Then again, louder, the wood groaned, dust falling from the ceiling. I pointed my rifle toward the door, finger tight on the trigger. The third impact nearly split the frame. I could hear the deadbolt straining. I shouted that I was armed, but the only reply was breathing. Heavy, uneven breathing just beyond the door, so deep it vibrated through the wood. The handle began to twist slowly, back and forth, testing, patient. I took a step closer, every nerve screaming at me to run, when I saw the metal start to bend, not snap but bend, like something incredibly strong was pressing from the other side. I fired through the door once, the echo booming through the cabin. Silence followed, then a dragging sound retreating into the snow. I didn't open the door until sunrise. When I did, I saw tracks, deep impressions leading away from the porch into the trees, shaped like bare feet but too long, the toes spread and clawed. Something dark stained the snow near the threshold, half frozen, thick as oil. I followed the tracks only a few yards before they disappeared into untouched snow, as if whatever had made them simply stopped existing. The next 3 days blurred together. The storm came back stronger, cutting off all roads. I tried to keep my mind occupied with repairs, but every time I looked toward the tree line, I felt watched. I found new scratches along the back wall each morning, higher up than before. I didn't sleep much. On the 4th night, I woke to the radio turning on by itself. A faint voice whispered through static, my name stretched and distorted. Kevin. Kevin, come outside. The voice was low, broken, almost pleading. I froze, staring at the speaker as the voice continued, repeating my name each time closer. Then it stopped, replaced by a faint breathing, like someone holding the mic inches from their mouth. I turned the radio off, pulled the batteries out, and threw it across the room. Not long after, I heard the footsteps again outside. This time they didn't circle. They came straight to the front door. Slow, deliberate. 1 step, 2, pause. The handle rattled, then stopped. I waited, rifle ready, heart hammering so hard I could barely see straight. After a few moments of silence, I heard scratching against the door again, slower, almost curious. Then came a sound that made my stomach twist, a voice mimicking mine, whispering from the other side, low and broken. Let me in. The words were wrong, stilted, like something trying to shape human speech but not built for it. I couldn't move. The voice repeated, this time higher pitched, almost mocking. Let me in, Kevin. I fired again, and the sound vanished. At dawn, there were no tracks, no marks on the door. Nothing but silence. When the rescue team finally reached the outpost 2 days later, I was standing outside in the snow, waiting. They said I looked pale and exhausted, eyes red from no sleep. I told them part of the truth. The generator failed. I heard animals. I panicked. They searched the surrounding area for the missing hikers, found nothing but their campsite exactly as I had, still neat, still empty. One of the rangers found the GoPro where I'd left it. When they tried to play it, all the files were gone. The camera was completely blank. I transferred out of Denali a month later. The official report listed the hikers as missing, presumed dead. No mention of the strange tracks or the sounds on the radio. I didn't fight it. But sometimes, when I'm on night patrols in quieter parks, I still hear that same breathing just beyond the tree line. Sometimes, when I check the camera footage from my patrol car, I catch a second shadow moving behind me even when I'm standing alone. And once, last winter, I was stationed at a small ranger post outside Fairbanks. The local police called me in to help search for a lost camper. They said his tent was zipped, campfire still warm, gear untouched. When they showed me the scene, I felt the blood drain from my face. It looked exactly like the one I'd found years ago in Denali, down to the same half-melted footprints circling the tents. Later that night, as we drove away, one of the deputies said something I'll never forget. He said he'd been near the glacier earlier that week and heard a scream echoing across the ice. But when he pulled out his phone to record it, the sound stopped instantly, like the mountain itself was listening. Now, every time I think back to that night, the tapping on the window, the voice whispering through the radio, the shadow with fingers too long, I wonder if Denali keeps pieces of the people who vanished there. Maybe it doesn't kill them. Maybe it just changes them, reshapes them into something else that waits in the snow for the next person foolish enough to listen. I still have the bullet I fired through that door, the one I dug out of the wall the next morning. It's warped, bent almost flat like it hit something harder than bone or metal. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and hold it up to the light, and I swear I can still smell the cold on it, that mix of blood and ice and something older than both. I tell myself I'll never go back to Denali, but deep down, I know the park never lets go. It watches, it remembers. And someday, when the snow is heavy enough and the silence deep enough, I'll hear that voice again, whispering through the wind, "Let me in." I used to think nothing in Bethel could scare me. That was before the winter. The ground started whispering my name. Back then, I was 21, a part-time teacher's aide at Gladys Tundra Elementary, saving up to transfer to Anchorage for college. My life was ordinary, quiet, the kind of quiet that only an Alaskan town can hold when the snow buries every sound. I rented a small trailer on the edge of town near the Kuskokwim River, close enough to hear the ice crack at night. People said the wind made strange noises out there, but I never listened much. I had grown up in Bethel, son of a fisherman and a nurse, used to the smell of diesel and fish guts, used to storms that could peel siding off houses. But that winter was different. The cold felt older somehow, like it remembered things it wasn't supposed to. It started the same week the school boiler broke and the district closed classes for 3 days. My friend Caleb, who worked at the supply depot, said we should use the time off to explore. He'd heard about an old construction site out past the frozen marsh, a half-finished research outpost from the 70s that got abandoned after an accident. The locals called it the Deep Below Station, though nobody really knew why. Everyone in town had a story about that place. Some said the crew found gas pockets under the permafrost. Others said something else was down there, tunnels left behind by miners a century ago. I'd heard those stories my whole life, but I'd never been there. Caleb's excitement was contagious, and by Friday afternoon, 5 of us had piled into his rusty Ford Ranger. Caleb driving, his girlfriend Nevaeh riding shotgun, me, Rafi, and Jordan in the back seat with our backpacks and headlamps. The road out of Bethel was rough, barely more than packed snow that led into open tundra. We drove past the last streetlight and into darkness, the headlights bouncing off drifts taller than the hood. The sky was a gray smear of low clouds, no stars, no moon. It took us nearly 40 minutes to reach the site, a cluster of decaying buildings half buried in snow. Rusted fuel drums leaned at angles, and the main building's door hung open, banging lightly in the wind. We stepped out into the cold, our breath fogging thick. The silence was deep. No birds, no creaking trees, just the far-off groan of the frozen river. Caleb laughed and said, "It felt like we'd reached the end of the world." He wasn't wrong. We started with the main structure, concrete walls cracked and covered with frost. Inside, our headlamps caught the reflection of broken glass and old equipment half swallowed by ice. There was graffiti all over the walls, names, dates, strange symbols that looked burned into the paint. Someone had written "They're still listening" in large black letters across one wall. Nevaeh said it gave her chills and wanted to go back, but Caleb brushed it off, saying we'd come this far. He'd found an old blueprint online that showed a service tunnel running under the building, probably where the scientists stored gear or samples. The entrance was supposed to be behind the main generator room. We followed him through a hallway of bent metal panels until we reached a steel hatch bolted to the floor. The bolts were old and rusted, but the hatch itself was half open, revealing a dark hole beneath. Caleb aimed his light down, showing a ladder leading into blackness. "See?" "Nothing to it," he said with a grin. I hesitated. The air coming from below smelled strange, like old earth and wet iron. But everyone else was already climbing down, so I followed. The ladder dropped about 15 feet before opening into a tunnel lined with corrugated metal. It felt warmer down there, the air thick and damp. Every sound echoed, our boots, our breathing, even the faint drip of melting ice. About 50 yards in, we found a large chamber with collapsed crates and dusty lab tables. There were still papers scattered around, diagrams of ice core samples, maps of underground formations. Raffi pointed at one labeled Shaft B, Restricted Access. The map showed a network of tunnels branching deep under the tundra. Nevaeh asked why scientists would need mine shafts. No one had an answer. As we explored, my headlamp flickered, and for a moment the light caught something on the far wall, small smudges, dark against the frost. I moved closer and realized they were handprints. Child-sized, dozens of them, pressed into the ice like someone had been reaching out from inside. I told the others, but when they looked, they just laughed, saying it was probably condensation patterns. I wasn't so sure. We kept going. The tunnel forked ahead, one path blocked by debris, the other sloping downward. Caleb chose the downward one, saying it probably led to the lower storage rooms. The deeper we went, the louder the air seemed to hum, a low vibration that made my teeth ache. I felt it under my boots, like something moving far below us. That's when we found the camp. Old sleeping bags, lanterns, empty food cans, and notebooks. Everything frozen stiff but recent. No dust, no decay. There were coffee cups, even a still sealed jar of peanut butter. Jordan found an ID badge half buried under ice. It belonged to a man named Aaron Dale, contractor for the Alaska Geological Survey. He'd gone missing 2 years earlier. We all stared at each other. The air suddenly felt too close, like it was pressing on our chests. Caleb picked up one of the notebooks and flipped through it. Most pages were smeared or torn, but one entry stood out. The handwriting was frantic, the words uneven. "They hear us when the ice shifts. The voices aren't in the wind. They come through the cracks." Nevaeh whispered that we should leave, but Caleb kept reading. Another page said, "Don't speak near the walls. They remember names." He looked up, uneasy, and that's when it happened. A sound, faint, echoing through the metal walls. It was like someone dragging a chain across stone. Then, softly, my name, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, calm and close, right beside my ear. I froze. Caleb asked what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. The voice had been mine. It had sounded exactly like me. The scraping came again, closer now, followed by a wet slapping noise, like bare feet on concrete. Our light swung wildly across the tunnel, catching glimpses of movement too fast to see clearly. We ran. The tunnel twisted and branched, and in the panic we lost track of the way back. The humming grew louder, turning into a deep rumble that shook the walls. Frost fell like dust around us. We burst into another chamber, larger than the others, with thick cables hanging from the ceiling and a huge metal door on the far side, marked Shaft C. It was dented inward, like something had tried to claw its way out. Nakia was crying, begging Caleb to leave, but before we could move, we heard a low thump from behind the door. Then another. The metal flexed. Raffi shouted that we had to go, and that finally snapped Caleb out of it. We bolted back the way we came, following the faint draft we hoped led to the surface. The air grew colder as we ran, our lights dimming one by one. At one point, Jordan stumbled, and his light hit the tunnel wall, revealing more of those tiny handprints, smeared in streaks that looked wet even though the air was freezing. By the time we reached the ladder, the noise behind us had turned into a chorus, whispers, scraping, the sound of nails dragging across metal. I could hear them breathing, close enough to feel the air move on my neck. We climbed fast. My gloves slipped on the rungs, and when I looked down, I saw something pale pulling itself along the floor below. Too many joints, too thin, like it was made of ice and sinew. We slammed the hatch shut when we got out, piling debris over it. The wind outside felt like salvation, but our relief didn't last long. The truck's tires were shredded, not punctured, ripped apart. The seats were slashed open, the engine compartment gutted. Whoever or whatever had done it knew exactly what to break. We argued about what to do, panic rising. Caleb said we should start walking toward town, but the sun was already dropping behind the tundra. The shadows stretched long across the snow. That's when Nakia noticed carvings on a nearby post, fresh ones. The date, only 2 weeks earlier, and beneath it, the word behind. We gathered what we could and started walking, staying close to the tree line. Every few minutes, I'd hear something in the wind. Faint murmurs, almost like the ice was whispering our names as it cracked. By 9 that night, we reached the frozen edge of the river. The moon had come out, thin and white, lighting our path. We could see the faint glow of Bethel's lights miles away. That's when the dog appeared. A stray husky, ribs showing, fur matted with ice. It stood ahead of us on the trail, growling low, staring not at us but at something behind. Then it started barking, a frantic, desperate sound. We turned. The snow was moving. Something pale and tall was sliding just beneath the surface, leaving long ridges that rippled toward us. We ran again, this time without stopping. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't look back until I saw the lights of the highway ahead. A state trooper found us around 1:15 a.m. He thought we'd been drinking or hallucinating from the cold, but when Caleb showed him the ID badge and photos from his phone, his face changed. They sent a search team out the next day. The outpost was there, the hatch too, but it was sealed under a thick sheet of new ice, as if the ground had frozen solid overnight. No trace of the truck, or the handprints, or anything else we'd seen. The official report said we'd mistaken the site for an old pipeline storage area and imagined the rest due to exhaustion and stress. But a month later, I woke up to find small handprints on my trailer window, pressed into the frost from the outside. No kids live anywhere near me. And sometimes, when the river ice cracks at night, I still hear my name, soft from far away, echoing up from the ground. Caleb moved south that spring. Nakia doesn't talk about it. Raffi joined the Coast Guard. Jordan disappeared 2 winters later, last seen heading toward the same marsh road. I still live in Bethel, still teach at the same school. The kids sometimes talk about seeing figures near the old power line road, moving under the snow. I pretend not to believe them. But when my dog starts barking at the empty chair by the window and refuses to eat, I know the deep below isn't gone. It's waiting. And I think this time, it remembers my name. I always thought I understood the wilderness. I grew up breathing in the cold bite of Alaskan air, walking shorelines where the fog clings to the world like a secret that never wants to be told. My name is Jackson, and I teach earth science at the small high school here in Seward. People say I've got the kind of patience that only comes from growing up in places where silence can last for hours. But what happened that November proved that silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's the sound before something tears open. My older brother Noah was the kind of person who made the impossible look easy. Everyone in Seward knew him. He was the guy who could read the sea like a map, who could find his way through any trail even in blizzard whiteouts. He'd been climbing and hiking since he was 10, always coming back with another story, another journal filled with sketches and coordinates. He wasn't just good at it, he was drawn to it, like the wild called him by name. The morning he disappeared, it was cold enough that the sea smoke drifted over the harbor like ghosts. I was at school prepping lab work when Mom texted to ask if I'd heard from Noah. He'd sent a message early that morning, a picture of his boots beside his old blue pickup. The caption read, "Heading up Bear Ridge. Solo day." Back before dinner. That was 7:40 a.m. He never came back. When Mom called around 6 that evening, her voice was shaking in a way I hadn't heard since Dad's heart attack years ago. She said Noah's truck was still parked by the trailhead, locked, his gear untouched in the back. My father had gone out there to look before dark and said the tracks in the gravel were fresh, no sign of anyone else. The temperature had already dropped below zero, and snow was starting again. Noah hadn't packed overnight gear. I finished grading the papers I'd been holding without realizing my hands were trembling. There's a kind of fear that doesn't shout, it just sits in your stomach like a cold stone. By 8, I was at my parents' house, helping organize a search call with the rangers. They told us to wait until morning. Said Noah probably got turned around, maybe built a shelter until daylight, but I knew my brother. He didn't make mistakes like that. By dawn, more than 30 people gathered at the trailhead, their breath clouding the air as we loaded up with radios and flashlights. The search coordinator was a woman named Karen, her face weathered from years of winter rescues. She split us into groups of 4 mapping sections on a clipboard. My team got the first 4 miles, an easy stretch, but the snow made it hard to tell fresh prints from old. Still, it didn't take long before we found his tracks. They were unmistakable, wide steps, deep tread marks from the same kind of Salomon boots he always wore. We could see where he'd stopped to adjust his pack, where he'd paused by the overlook that faced the sound. The pattern told his morning like a story written in snow. Everything was normal until the marks changed. Around the 4-mile marker, his tracks linked in stride, doubling as if he'd started to run. The prints veered off the main trail into the tree line. There were no other prints. No animal, no person, just Noah's, pounding harder and faster straight into the woods. We followed them into the trees. Branches snapped and bent. The snow churned where he pushed through. It led us to a small clearing, maybe 30 yards across. And there, the footprints ended, just stopped. One step into open ground, and then nothing. The snow beyond was smooth, untouched. No backtracking, no climb marks, not even disturbed branches overhead. Karen kept walking the perimeter, circling again and again, muttering under her breath. The silence felt thick, like the air was holding its breath. That clearing stayed burned in my mind. The search went on through the day. Dogs were brought in. They followed his scent right to that same spot and then started whining, circling like something invisible blocked them. Helicopters swept over with thermal scanners, picking up the usual wildlife but no sign of Noah, not a single heat signature. By nightfall, state police had arrived. They taped off the area, photographing every track, measuring the stride, collecting snow samples. One detective asked if Noah had any enemies. I almost laughed. Noah's biggest argument was probably with a fishing line. He coached Little League, volunteered at the fire station, had just gotten engaged to a local nurse named Lily. He had no reason to vanish. Then, on the second day, something strange happened. One of the forensics techs noticed that the snow in Noah's last few footprints looked different, compressed too deeply, almost fused. When they took samples back, the lab found tiny glass beads mixed into the snow, the kind formed by sudden extreme heat. But there were no burn marks, no sign of fire or explosion. Just those microscopic glass spheres, like lightning had struck the snow without light or sound. It didn't make sense. The search expanded, spreading miles out, but by the third day, hope started fading. That's when Lily showed up with something that changed everything. She'd gone through Noah's home office the night before, desperate for clues. Hidden behind a filing cabinet, she found a folder of printed documents and old photos labeled Project Northlight. Inside were declassified military reports from the 1960s, tests about electromagnetic resonance experiments done near Bear Ridge, supposedly to study weather control. Noah had scribbled notes in the margins, comparing geological surveys with magnetic field readings he'd recorded on his compass during hikes. One spot on the map was circled over and over, the same clearing where his tracks ended. Beneath it, he'd written in shaky pen, source point, incident record. 2 researchers never found. After those papers surfaced, everything changed overnight. By the next morning, military trucks were blocking the road to the trail. People in hazmat suits unloaded strange equipment, metal frames, panels that looked like satellite dishes, generators humming with a deep vibration you could feel in your ribs. They said it was environmental hazard mitigation. The rangers weren't allowed past the perimeter anymore. My parents were told to go home. I didn't. I hid in the tree line with binoculars. The men worked methodically, taking soil samples, setting up sensors in perfect geometric rows. Around 11 that night, a low-frequency hum started pulsing through the air. The snow began vibrating on the branches. Then the hum turned into something higher, thinner, almost a human voice stretched to breaking. That's when it happened. The air at the center of the clearing began to shimmer, like heat waves off asphalt, except it was -10 degrees. The snow in the center swirled upward, spiraling in a perfect column, defying gravity, then fell back as if nothing had happened. The noise stopped. The men froze. One of them shouted something I couldn't hear over the wind. Then they shut down everything and packed it all by dawn. A day later, the official story broke on local radio. Noah had been found alive near a ranger cabin 8 miles north. They said he was hypothermic and disoriented, but stable. They said he'd gotten lost and built a snow shelter. But when I went to the hospital, I knew the truth. He looked like Noah, same scar on his jaw, same tattoo on his wrist. But when he looked at me, it felt like he was staring through me. His eyes didn't blink at the right rhythm. His voice came out calm, measured, like he was translating thoughts from somewhere far away. When I asked what happened on the mountain, he paused, staring into an empty corner of the room, and said softly, "I was walking, then I was walking somewhere else, then I was walking back." Lily called off the engagement a week later. Said she couldn't sleep near him. Said sometimes she'd wake up and find him standing by the window, whispering like he was listening to something only he could hear. Months passed. He quit his job, sold his house, and moved to a cabin near Kenai Fjords, deep in the forest. He stopped answering calls. When I finally visited, his walls were covered in notebooks filled with strange drawings, diagrams of spirals, mathematical equations I couldn't follow, words like interference planes and fold resonance. He'd been talking online with people from around the world, others who claimed to have vanished and returned. A woman from Norway lost 3 days near a fjord. A park ranger from Montana found a week missing from his life. All of them changed. They shared coordinates and data points, trying to find a pattern. Noah believed the government testing in the 60s didn't create weapons. It tore the world open, made thin places where time and distance collapse, places where people slipped through without meaning to. I didn't want to believe him. But then he showed me his GPS watch, the one he'd been wearing that day. It was still running, perfectly synced. The data showed he'd been moving continuously for 9 days after his disappearance, covering over 300 miles, reaching elevations that don't exist on any Alaskan map. When I looked at the map trace, the path rose and fell in impossible arcs, like he'd walked through space itself. He deleted the data in front of me, said quietly, "Some paths shouldn't be followed." That was the last time I saw him. A few months later, I went back to the trail. The snow was melting, and the military had long gone, leaving behind metal stakes arranged in a perfect circle. When I stood near the center, my compass needle spun without stopping. The air there felt heavy, like the atmosphere was denser. Fishermen in Seward say they hear knocking under their hulls on still nights, like something tapping from beneath. The harbor's foghorn sometimes blows 3 times with no wind at all, always the same rhythm, like a code. And then there's the widow who lives on the edge of the docks. People say she still finds her husband's fishing jacket hanging wet in the shed every morning, dripping seawater, though it hasn't rained for days. The town has stories now, whispers that ride the fog. They say Bear Ridge isn't just a trail, it's a fault line between worlds. And sometimes, when the wind dies, you can hear footsteps crunching snow where no one walks. Noah doesn't hike anymore. He doesn't even leave his cabin. When I call, sometimes he'll pause mid-sentence like he's listening. Then he'll whisper, "They're walking again," and hang up. It's been 3 years since that night. I don't hike either. I used to think the wilderness was just quiet, but now I know it listens. And sometimes, if you stand too long in the stillness, it listens back. I didn't believe in strange lights, lost voices, or messages carried on frozen wind. Not until the night my sister vanished on the Arctic Road. My name's William Hart. I'm 34, and I've lived in Utqiagvik my entire life. Most people wouldn't survive a month here. Not through the endless polar night when the sun doesn't rise for weeks and the cold gnaws through every layer of clothing. But this place is in my blood. My father was a mechanic at the airfield. My mother a nurse at Samuel Simmons Hospital, and I fix weather monitors for the research station just outside town. Life here is quiet, predictable, until something happens that makes the dark feel alive. It started on a Wednesday night in early October, the kind of night when the horizon disappears and everything, sky, land, and sea, melts into one black sheet. I'd just gotten home from a 12-hour shift repairing frozen sensors out near Point Barrow. My boots were still wet, my fingers stiff from the cold, and the only thing I wanted was to crawl under a blanket and lose myself in the background noise of my TV. The clock read 10:47 p.m. when my phone lit up on the coffee table. It was my sister Hazel. Hazel was 28, bold and restless. She worked as a freelance environmental researcher, traveling between Fairbanks, Anchorage, and sometimes as far as Prudhoe Bay. That week, she'd been hired to help collect atmospheric samples from an isolated ridge north of Deadhorse, a place few people even know exists. It was supposed to be a quick trip drive up, take readings, come back the next day. I answered on the second ring, yawning. Her voice came through the static, tired but trying to sound cheerful. She told me she'd stopped on her drive to take a break, somewhere off the Dalton Highway, maybe an hour south of Utqiagvik. She said she'd found an old pullout where she could see the faint shimmer of the northern lights, though with the clouds thick that night, it was probably just a trick of the snow. The signal kept cutting out. I heard the sound of her hazard lights clicking and the creak of her car door opening. "Just stretching my legs," she said, her voice small against the wind. "Been driving since 3 this afternoon. I'll text when I start moving again." I told her to be careful. The Dalton's a long stretch of nothing. No lights, no gas stations, no cell towers, just frozen tundra and ice fog that swallows you whole. She laughed softly, said I worried too much, and before I could answer, the call ended with a burst of static. I waited for her text. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 30. When I sent a quick, "You okay?" It showed undelivered. That wasn't unusual up there, but something about it made me uneasy. Hazel always checked in, always kept her GPS on. She wasn't careless. By 1:12 a.m., I'd called her 6 times, straight to voicemail. I told myself maybe she pulled over to rest, maybe the cold killed her battery, but she never let her phone die, not on those drives. My chest felt tight as I stared at the dark window, the faint reflection of my face against the glass. Behind it, nothing but frozen silence stretching for miles. By 2:18 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I called the Alaska State Troopers. The dispatcher who answered sounded half asleep, polite but detached. When I explained Hazel's route, her last location, and how she'd been out of contact for hours, her tone sharpened. She asked for Hazel's details, her full name, what kind of car she drove, a gray Subaru Crosstrek, license plate, and what she'd been wearing. I told her black thermal pants, snow boots, and that green parka she never took off. They said a patrol would pass that stretch of the highway at sunrise. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch staring at my phone as if I could will it to ring. Every time the wind hit the windows, I jumped. At 7:05 a.m., the troopers called. A man's voice this time, Trooper Lowell. The sound of his tone made the air feel heavy before he even said the words. They'd found Hazel's car. It was parked at an old gravel turnout near mile marker 233, not far from the frozen coast. The driver's door hung open, the engine still warm. Her hazard lights were clicking faintly when they arrived, battery nearly dead. Inside, her phone was on the floor by the gas pedal, screen cracked. Her backpack was on the passenger seat, wallet, ID, everything untouched. The keys were in the ignition. He said when they turned the engine, it started instantly. The temperature outside had been 30 below, yet the engine block was still warm, as if it had been running until moments before they got there. That meant someone, or something, had been there that morning. I told Lowell I was coming. He told me not to, said it was dangerous to drive out in those conditions, but I was already pulling on my coat. Before we hung up, he asked what Hazel had been wearing again. When I repeated the green parka, there was a pause long enough for me to feel my stomach drop. "We found a green parka folded on the back seat," he said quietly. "It took me 6 hours to reach the site. 6 hours of empty tundra, radio static, and an eerie sense that something was pacing me in the white distance. When I arrived, the scene looked almost staged. The Subaru sat alone, flanked by 2 state vehicles, the hazard lights long dead. The open door faced the horizon, as if Hazel had stepped out to look at something just beyond sight. Her coffee mug sat in the cup holder, ice crusting the top, a half-eaten granola bar on the dashboard. Everything looked normal except for the silence. The snow was untouched around the car. Not a single footprint. The troopers said the dogs had caught her scent leading into the tundra, then nothing. It stopped about 50 feet from the car, in the middle of open snow. No wind that night, no new snow, yet the trail simply vanished. One of the dog handlers, an older man with frostbitten cheeks, looked unsettled. "I've been doing this 30 years, he muttered to me, and I've never seen a trail end in open air. They searched for days." Helicopters scanned with infrared. Locals joined the search on snowmobiles. They found nothing. No footprints, no body, no clothing. On the second day, they found her boots. Placed side by side on a rock near a frozen pond, the laces still tied, the socks tucked neatly inside, no tracks around them. It was as if she'd stepped out of them and floated away. Then came something stranger. The forensic techs recovered Hazel's phone. When they powered it on, they found that between 11:32 p.m. and 4:06 a.m., the phone had taken 23 photos, all black. Uniformly black. Not dark like no light flat black pixels, though metadata showed the flash had gone off each time. The photos were taken at irregular intervals, 30 seconds, 2 minutes, 8 minutes apart. The GPS log showed the phone never left that turnout. The last image was at 4:06 a.m., exactly 3 hours before they found the car. Her call log showed 9 missed calls from an unknown number, each lasting 11 seconds. When the phone company tried to trace it, they found no record. They said maybe it was a glitch. But I've heard those recordings. When you amplify the background noise, under the static you can hear breathing, and faintly, a voice whispering, "Let me in." The troopers eventually closed the case. Official cause, missing person, presumed exposure. But that wasn't closure. That was convenience. In the months that followed, I hired a private investigator. He found something the police hadn't mentioned, or had chosen not to. Over the last 10 years, 6 other people had vanished along that same stretch of the Dalton. Different years, different seasons, all traveling alone. All found with vehicles running, engines warm, doors open, none ever seen again. I started driving that road myself, weekends, nights, whenever the isolation clawed too deep. I'd stop where Hazel's car was found, sit there, and listen to the cold. Sometimes, when the wind blew from the north, I'd hear faint static crackle through my truck's radio. And every so often, just before the sound cut off, I'd hear my name whispered, drawn out, almost human. Once, I stepped out of my truck around midnight. The air was so still, my breath hung in front of me. But as I exhaled, I saw words form in the mist. They spelled Hazel. And when I blinked, they were gone. Last month marked a full year since she disappeared. I went back one last time, or that's what I told myself. The polar night had already swallowed the town, and the snow shimmered faintly under the aurora. I parked at the same turnout and stood where her car had been found. That's when I saw it, the light. A faint glow, deep under the snow, flickering softly like a lantern buried beneath the ice. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, almost alive. I stepped closer, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The snow beneath my boots was solid, untouched, but the light seemed to move, shifting as if following me. Then my radio, an old CB model, crackled to life on its own, static, then my sister's voice whispering through the noise. "Will," my whole body froze. "Will, it's cold down here." The transmission cut off and the light vanished. I don't remember driving home. I woke the next morning with frost on my clothes and my truck door open. Now, sometimes when I lie awake, my radio turns itself on. The static hums softly, and through it, I can hear the same voice. Sometimes it says my name, sometimes it says words I can't understand. And last night, for the first time, my breath spelled something new. It said, "Look below." So tomorrow, when the polar night settles again, I'm going back out there. If anyone finds this recording, if you ever drive the Dalton near mile marker 233, don't stop when you see the lights under the snow. Don't answer if the radio calls your name, because once you hear it, once it speaks back, it means it already knows where you are. And it never forgets a voice that answers. I didn't believe the old stories about the pale stranger. Not until the night he knocked on my cabin door. 3 soft raps that sounded like knuckles on frozen bone. It was December, and the snow outside swallowed all sound except his laughter. Later, when I checked the baby monitor, the one I hadn't plugged in for months, a man's voice whispered my name through static. Now, I'm not sure what's real anymore, or if Alaska itself remembers us at all. My name's Ranger Elias Boone, and I've spent 12 winters stationed out near Talkeetna Estate, halfway between the Chugach Peaks and the Susitna River. Folks call it the last quiet corner, a place where the northern lights look close enough to touch, but where things go missing more often than they should. When you live this far north, you learn the rhythm of isolation. Snow piles against the door by late October. By December, it's waist deep. The power flickers, radios crackle with phantom signals, and sometimes, on still nights, you hear a knock, gentle, polite, like someone asking to come in. The locals call him the Pale Stranger. They say he comes once a year to every cabin along the old survey trail. Always in December, always after the first blizzard. Nobody remembers his face clearly, only that his skin looks wrong, too smooth, too clean, like something trying to imitate a person. When I first took the ranger post, I figured it was just a frontier myth to keep kids inside at night. But stories have a way of lingering in the snow. I kept to a small ranger cabin built in the 60s, 1 room, propane heat, a radio tower that barely reached the next outpost, and an old baby monitor left behind by the last ranger. I never used it. I didn't even have kids. Still, I kept it on the shelf, unplugged. Most nights were quiet. I checked trap lines, kept the trails clear, logged weather data. A routine man's life, until early December last year, when the laughter began. At first, it came through the radio, faint chuckles between bursts of static. I thought maybe it was signal interference from Anchorage. Then, a few nights later, the laughter came again, but softer, closer, like it was inside the cabin. That same week, I got a call from Mara, a wildlife photographer from Wasilla, who had gone missing 3 days prior. At least that's what the sheriff said when he came through. They'd found her truck near the base of Hatcher Pass, engine still warm, camera missing. They sent her photo through the regional network, asked us to keep an eye out. Mara's face stuck with me, bright eyes, windburned cheeks, and a small red knit cap she wore in every shot online. Something about her expression felt unfinished, like the photo had caught her right before she saw something terrible. That weekend, a storm rolled in. By midnight, the snow was coming down hard enough to bury the radio antenna. I sat by the stove reading log entries from past rangers when I noticed the baby monitor light flicker. It wasn't plugged in. At first, it was just static. Then, a thin, stretched voice spoke, distant but clear. "Ranger Boone, is the trail clear?" I froze. The voice wasn't one I recognized. It sounded calm, polite, like someone calling from far away. Then came the laughter again, faint but familiar. When I turned to look at the window, the reflection staring back wasn't mine. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and across the white drift stood a figure, tall, pale, dressed in old expedition gear. He lifted a gloved hand and knocked 3 times. That's when I remembered the story. Every cabin, every December. I didn't open the door. I did what every Alaskan knows to do. I waited. You never invite something in when you don't know its name. After a while, the knocking stopped. The figure turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving only footprints that ended halfway across the clearing, like he'd been lifted away. The next morning, I logged the encounter and reported possible trespasser. Headquarters marked it as unverified, which is government code for ghost story, but things didn't stay quiet. 3 days later, a hiker from Anchorage came by, said his camera had been acting strange. He showed me the photos, mostly landscapes of Denali and Talkeetna, until the last one. It was Mara, standing in front of my cabin. The timestamp read December 17th, 2 days in the future. That's when I started to believe something was wrong with time in this place. The locals say Alaska holds on to memories like permafrost, slow to thaw, impossible to bury. And as much as I wanted to leave, I couldn't shake the sense that the stranger wasn't done knocking. For the next few days, I kept Mara's photograph pinned to the map board above my cot. I stared at it between patrols, wondering how a picture dated 2 days ahead of time could exist. I wanted to think it was a camera glitch, or maybe I'd misread the timestamp, but the snow outside my cabin told me otherwise. Because in the corner of that same photo, behind Mara, was a shape, pale, watching. By December 15th, I hadn't slept right in 2 nights. The wind clawed at the roof, and my radio spat static like it was choking on whispers. The baby monitor, still unplugged, lit up again around 3:17 a.m. I sat up, staring at it across the room. A woman's voice this time, breathless, breaking. "He's coming, please. Don't open the door." Then the sound of boots crunching in snow, not from the speaker, but from outside the cabin. I reached for the rifle by my bed and moved to the window. Out there, under the dim halo of the porch light, were footprints, fresh ones. They led right up to the door. 3 knocks followed. Not hard. Polite, rhythmic, almost gentle. Knock, knock, knock. My breath fogged against the glass. I could see a silhouette, tall and motionless, his head tilted like he was listening for movement. Then, in a low voice, "Ranger Boone, the trail is clear." I froze. Those were the same words I'd heard through the monitor days ago. When I didn't answer, the figure stepped closer. The light caught his face, smooth, colorless like candle wax, no lips, no pores. Just a pale imitation of skin stretched too tight. Then he smiled impossibly wide and vanished into the dark. The next morning, I followed the tracks down the ridge. They led to the frozen creek and ended where the ice turned thin and black. But there, frozen in the shallow edge, I found something else, a camera. It was Mara's. I recognized the red strap she'd always worn around her neck in photos. The screen was cracked, but when I powered it on, the last image was still there, my cabin again, same angle, but this time, the door was open. And standing inside was me, except the me in the photo wasn't wearing what I had on. His parka was older, torn at the sleeve, the ranger patch half faded, just like the uniform from a photograph I'd seen in the archives. The ranger before me, Harlan Dorsey. He'd gone missing 10 years ago, December 17th. That discovery broke something loose in my mind. The calendar on the wall read December 16th. Tomorrow was the same date stamped on Mara's final photograph, and something told me the stranger would return. That night, I locked the door, boarded the window, and set the rifle by the bed. I stayed awake listening to the cabin creak under the snow's weight. Every sound had shape, the sigh of the wind, the pop of ice in the stove, the slow drag of footsteps in the snow outside. Then the radio clicked on by itself. "Ranger Boone, report your status." It wasn't headquarters. The voice was deeper, older, echoing like it came from underwater. "Harlan Dorsey," I said into the mic. "If that's you, what do you want?" Static. Then laughter. "You opened the trail. Now you keep it." The power died. The baby monitor glowed bright green. 3:17 a.m. I'll never forget that time. It was when the stranger came back. The knock this time was harder. Not three, but one long drag of a hand down the wood. Shh. I heard my own voice on the monitor, whispering from the speaker, "Elias, don't open the door." But I'd already stood up, already moved closer. When I peeked through the window, there were two figures now. One pale, one darker, wearing a red knit cap. Mara. She looked alive, cold and terrified, but alive. Her hand pressed against the glass. Her lips moved. "Help me." Behind her, the pale stranger stood perfectly still, eyes hollow, head tilted. I threw the latch. The door flew open, and the wind howled through the cabin like something screaming. Mara stumbled inside, collapsing to her knees, frost clinging to her hair. "He found me," she gasped. "He won't stop until someone replaces him." The stranger's shadow fell across the doorway, but he didn't step in. He just stood there, waiting. "What is he?" I asked. She looked up, eyes wide. "A memory that needs a keeper." Then she fainted. I dragged her to the cot and covered her with blankets. Her pulse was weak, but steady. The door stayed open. I couldn't bring myself to close it. The stranger had vanished, but the snow outside showed no footprints. That's when I noticed the radio again. It flickered on, one last time, and played a message in a voice I recognized as my own. Older, strained. "If you're hearing this, don't go looking. Stay inside. He remembers us now." Then silence. I shut everything down, the lights, the radio, even the stove. Sat in the dark until dawn, the cold burning my hands. When morning came, Mara was gone. No prints, no sign she'd ever been there. I reported the entire event to headquarters that afternoon. They said the area would be closed for the season. Extreme weather, they called it. But that night, I developed the photos on Mara's camera. The last shot nearly stopped my heart. It wasn't of me or the stranger. It was of her, lying inside the cabin, asleep. The timestamp read December 17th, 3:17 a.m., same as before. Only this time, the figure standing beside her was smiling, and it wasn't me. I started digging after that. Old ranger logs, missing persons reports, weather archives. Every 10 years, a ranger disappeared from this post. Always in December, always after the first blizzard. The townsfolk knew. That's why they built their cabins in clusters, never alone. They said isolation feeds the pale stranger, gives him form. And now, I'd spent 12 winters here alone. That evening, I drove down to the Old Town Diner. The waitress, Greta, had been here longer than anyone. When I told her what I'd seen, she didn't laugh. She just nodded slow and said, "He used to be one of us." A prospector, got trapped up in the hills during the winter of '52. They say when he froze, he was still knocking on the door of his own cabin, too proud to ask for help. Now he looks for someone polite enough to let him in. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you listen." By the time I returned to the cabin that night, the wind had gone still, too still. The forest around Talkeetna held that kind of silence that means something's listening. The radio was dead. The baby monitor, however, flickered on its own. The green light pulsed like a heartbeat. I thought about smashing it, ending whatever tether it had to the other side. But the voice that came through stopped me cold. It was Mara's, calm now, but hollow. "He's almost done remembering." My stomach turned. I picked up the monitor and whispered, "Where are you?" "Same place you found Harlan." Then, silence. I geared up, lantern, parka, rifle, and followed the trail back to the frozen creek. The snow reflected moonlight like broken glass. Each step crunched through the crust, slow and deliberate. Halfway there, I saw him. The pale stranger. He was standing at the tree line, head tilted, eyes like empty holes in the snow. His clothes weren't old anymore. They were mine. Same ranger jacket, same boots. I raised the rifle. "You're not real," I said. He smiled. "Neither are you." My breath hitched. The wind shifted, carrying laughter. Not his, not Mara's, but my own. I stumbled forward, boots sinking deep. Beneath the ice, faint outlines swirled like shadows caught in water. Faces. Dozens of them. Men and women wearing ranger badges from every decade, back to the 50s. In the center I saw her, Mara, eyes open beneath the glassy surface reaching upward. I knelt and pounded the ice with my fist. Hang on. The stranger's reflection appeared beside hers. Only this time, it mimicked me. Every move I made, it copied, perfect as a mirror. Then the voice came from under the ice. "Every ranger leaves a trail. Every trail needs a keeper." The ice cracked. I fell through into freezing black water that burned like knives. Shapes moved around me, whispering, "Stay. Remember, stay." When I opened my eyes underwater, I saw flashes of other winters. Rangers knocking on doors, hearing their own voices echo back, seeing the same pale face waiting patiently outside. It wasn't a ghost. It was inheritance. Every ranger who'd vanished had become the pale stranger, a fragment of duty frozen into the land itself. The knock wasn't a warning. It was a call for relief. One leaves only when another takes his place. I kicked upward, lungs bursting, and broke through the surface. The forest was gone. I was standing in my cabin doorway dripping wet. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. The baby monitor glowed, and Mara's voice whispered again, "You opened the door." I turned. She was sitting on the cot, alive and warm, smiling faintly. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "Where did I go?" She didn't answer. She just pointed to the wall, where a fresh photograph was tacked up. It was of her standing beside me. But the me in the picture was pale, wax-skinned, eyes hollow. The caption on the bottom read, "Ranger Elias Boone, deceased, December 17th. I backed away. "That's not..." But she was already fading. Her skin turned pale, her breath vanishing into mist. "Someone always has to remember," she said softly. "You stayed too long." Then she was gone. The radio came alive again, blaring static. Between the noise, a familiar voice came through. Calm, practiced, official. "This is Ranger Elias Boone, Talkeetna Estate. Cabin secure, no signs of activity. Continuing patrol." My heart stopped. It was my voice. From the next room, I turned slowly. There I was, sitting at the desk, back turned, writing in the logbook. Same coat, same hair, same scar on the right ear. The pen scratched across the page. He knocked again tonight, December 17th. When he looked up, his face was pale and smooth, lips stretched too thin. He smiled. "Trail's clear, Ranger." Then everything went dark. When I woke again, daylight filtered through the frosted window. The storm had passed. My rifle leaned against the wall, my logbook open on the desk. The entry read in handwriting not quite mine, Harlan relieved. Boone remembered. Outside, the snow was untouched, except for a single pair of footprints leading to the forest and fading halfway through, as if the person had never been there. I stepped outside, calling Mara's name. No answer, just the slow hum of the wind against the trees. Then, faintly, the echo of laughter drifted from the radio inside. I went back in, sat down, and looked around the cabin. The stove, the photos, the monitor, everything as it should be. Until I noticed the date scratched into the glass of the window beside the cot. December 17th, every year. And beside it, in tiny letters, "Don't open the door. It's been 3 days since the storm." Or maybe it's been years. Time doesn't work the same way here anymore. The logs on my desk are full of names I don't remember writing. Harlan Dorsey, Mara Kells, J.P. Coulter, each name marked, relieved. When the sun rises over Talkeetna, it barely clears the horizon. Everything turns blue and gold for a few minutes, then slips back into gray. That's when the knocking begins again. Faint, polite, never angry. always 3 times. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. It doesn't matter. The trail remains clear either way. A few days ago, a new ranger snowmobile appeared at the tree line. He's young, maybe 25, full of purpose. I watched from the cabin window as he trudged up the slope, radio crackling. The same enthusiasm I once had before the land took its due. He'll knock soon, like they all do. I could warn him, scream through the storm that not every station needs a keeper. But part of me understands now. Alaska remembers us through the work we leave behind. It doesn't take souls out of cruelty, it takes them out of duty. I open the logbook to the last page. The handwriting shifts, no longer mine, but something steadier, older. It reads, "Remember them kindly, forget the cold." That night, I set the baby monitor on the windowsill. Outside, the aurora rippled green and white across the sky, like curtains closing on the world. The monitor hissed softly before a familiar voice whispered, "Trail's clear." I smiled. The same way Harlan must have smiled before me, the forest whispered back, carrying 1,000 footsteps that never quite fade. Each one belongs to someone who once believed they were the last. The snow drifts higher each year, burying the cabins, swallowing the evidence. Yet every December, the pattern repeats. The laughter, the footprints, the knock. 3:17 a.m. It isn't about ghosts anymore. It's about memory. The living keep forgetting, so the dead keep reminding. And tonight, when the new ranger reaches my door and knocks, I'll open it. Not out of fear, but respect. The trail shouldn't stay closed forever. He'll see me the way I saw Harlan, pale, quiet, waiting. He'll hesitate, hand hovering near the latch. I'll speak softly so he understands. "Trail's clear, Ranger. Keep it that way." And maybe, just maybe, he won't run. The wind outside howls like laughter, the same echo that began all this. I finally understand what it means. Not mockery, but relief. The sound of the land exhaling, letting go. If this place needs a keeper, let it be me. Let it remember someone who stayed out of love, not fear. Because out here, remembrance is survival. Tomorrow, or the next December 17th, someone else will hear the knock. Maybe they'll find this story on an old radio broadcast, or see my photo in a half-buried camera. Maybe they'll think it's fiction, but when the snow starts falling sideways and the world goes perfectly still, they'll understand what I did too late. That isolation doesn't haunt us, it invites us to listen. And when they hear 3 gentle knocks at their door, they'll realize the same truth that every ranger here learns in the end. You don't survive Talkeetna by keeping people out. You survive by remembering to let someone in. When the snow falls quiet and you hear a sound you can't explain, don't rush to close the door. Sometimes the past isn't hunting you, it's just asking to be remembered. If this story made you feel the cold breath of Talkeetna on your neck tonight, leave one word in the comments below: respect. For every voice that kept the trail clear, for every stranger who knocked, and for every listener brave enough to open the door, remember them kindly. Forget the cold. I never planned to tell this story. Not because I don't believe it, but because even after all these years, saying it out loud makes me feel like something might still be listening. My name is Aaron Wade, and this story didn't happen to me. It happened to my father almost 40 years ago, deep in the wilderness near Kenai, Alaska. Back then, he was in his early 20s, working as a marine repairman along the coast, the kind of man who spent more time under the open sky than under a roof. He loved the quiet, the untouched places, the sound of wind moving through the pines. But he also carried a restless streak, one that made him go further each time, further into places no one else cared to see. For most of my life, all I ever knew about that trip came from whispers, fragments told by my late uncle, who had been with him back then. My father never spoke about it. He would change the subject, his eyes going distant like he was hearing something only he could understand. It wasn't until a few nights ago, when I asked him again after all these years, that he finally told me everything. He didn't do it for closure. He did it as a warning. He wanted me to understand why some places in Alaska should never be disturbed, why respect and caution aren't just virtues but survival tools. He knew I'd inherited his love for exploring the Kenai forests, but he wanted me to know what happens when curiosity turns into carelessness. Back then, he and my uncle Henry Wade planned a week-long hiking trip through the remote valleys east of Kenai Lake. Their goal was to reach an old fishing settlement long abandoned after a storm decades earlier. The locals called it Greyweather, though no map marked its existence anymore. People in the nearby town said strange things about it, that you could hear crying there at night, that voices echoed through the woods even when the wind was still. It was early spring. The kind of cold that bit your fingertips after sunset but melted into calm warmth when the sun climbed over the mountains. The rivers were half-thawed, and the sound of dripping ice filled the air. It was the perfect time for a trek, quiet, peaceful, and full of promise. But there had been talk recently about a man who went missing near those same trails. He'd gone hiking alone 2 months earlier and never returned. The search had ended weeks before with no trace, no body, no clue. People said Alaska swallowed him, like it had done to so many others. Still, my father and Henry were young, full of that kind of energy that makes you think danger only happens to other people. They were careful, yes, but not enough to imagine what waited ahead. The first few days were beautiful. They followed a narrow trail that wound through valleys wrapped in fog, passing rusted fishing traps and old boats left to rot beside the creeks. The ruins of Greyweather began to appear by the fourth day, broken cabins, stone chimneys leaning like crooked fingers, fishing nets tangled in roots. They set up camp a short distance away, where the trees were thick and the ground dry. During the day, everything felt calm, even sacred. Birds sang, the river hummed, and the world seemed to move in rhythm. But when night came, the forest changed. My father said it was like the woods began to breathe. Slow, heavy, uneasy. Crickets started their strange melody, and something else joined them, faint but deliberate. He tried to tell himself it was just the wind moving through hollow trees, but his uncle didn't sleep either. On the third night, my father dreamed someone was watching him. In his dream, he stood by the dying campfire, and just beyond the orange light, a pair of eyes shimmered in the dark, too still, too focused. He woke up with his heart pounding, certain someone was standing just beyond the flames. But when he looked, there was only the quiet sway of branches. He lay back down, convincing himself it had been a dream, though the feeling of being watched lingered long after. The next morning, Henry looked pale. He said he hadn't slept, that he kept hearing footsteps crunching leaves near the tent. They both laughed it off at first, joking about local bears or wandering moose, but when they stepped outside, they stopped laughing. In the soft mud near their campfire were footprints. Human footprints, fresh ones. They led up to the edge of their tent, circled it once, and then vanished into the trees. There were no tracks leading in or back out, just a perfect trail ending in nothing. My father said his stomach twisted the moment he saw them. He didn't feel threatened, not exactly, just wrong. Like the air itself didn't want him there. Still, they continued. They had a destination and refused to let fear dictate the journey. Besides, they thought, maybe another hiker had passed through during the night. That explanation was simple, logical. But logic doesn't always survive long in the Alaskan wild. That afternoon, they hiked deeper toward the heart of Greyweather. The fog hung thicker there, curling between the trees like smoke from a dying fire. They began to hear faint noises. Not voices exactly, but the kind of sound you'd swear came from a throat trying not to be heard. When they reached the ruins of the old settlement, the air grew heavy. Cabins leaned against each other, roofs half collapsed, the remains of a dock reaching into the still, dark water. Somewhere nearby, a raven screamed, and the echo rolled through the trees like thunder. An old woman at a gas station in Soldotna had told them about this place before they left. She said a family once lived there, a family that disappeared without a trace. People said they were taken by the water, that they still cried out at night, begging for help no one could give. Of course, my father and Henry hadn't believed her. Ghost stories made long drives interesting, nothing more. But now, standing there, with the fog thick as breath, Her words didn't sound so ridiculous. They set up camp by the ruins that night. My father said he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by animals, but something older, something that didn't belong to the living world. He tried to distract himself by focusing on the campfire. He even caught himself staring into the flames too long, seeing shapes twist inside them. Faces, maybe. He couldn't be sure. Then, sometime after midnight, maybe around 2:17 a.m., the sound began. At first, it was soft, almost tender. A faint crying, distant but distinct. It wasn't an animal, he swore. It was human. He nudged Henry awake, and they listened together. The sound came from the ruins, a long, low moan mixed with what sounded like whispering. Someone was crying in the dark. They grabbed their flashlights and stepped carefully toward the sound. The closer they got, the colder the air became, their breaths turning to mist. The crying grew clearer, raw, broken, filled with pain. They turned a corner, and that's when they saw him. A man sat crouched in the corner of one of the ruined cabins. He was shirtless, his back torn and streaked with dirt and dried blood. His skin looked gray under the flashlight, his ribs sharp and visible. His hands trembled as he rocked back and forth, mumbling something they couldn't understand. They thought he might be the missing hiker, the man who vanished months earlier. My father called out softly, trying not to scare him. The man didn't turn. He just kept muttering, low and fast. Then they saw what he was doing. He was biting his own arm. Hard, deep enough that blood ran down his wrist and onto the floor. My father froze. The man didn't even seem to notice them, didn't flinch, didn't react. It was like his mind was gone, trapped somewhere else. They'd backed away slowly, terrified he might attack if startled. Once outside, they decided to leave food and water at the doorway before heading back down the trail to find help. When the search team went up the next morning, the man was still there, barely alive, severely dehydrated, his body covered in old wounds. They carried him down, but something strange happened afterward. The rescuers found more blood inside the cabin, a lot more, but it wasn't his. It belonged to someone else. The man never fully recovered. The doctor said his body healed, but his mind stayed somewhere else. He would wake in the middle of the night screaming for his wife to hide. He said a man was coming. No one ever learned what happened during those 2 months he was missing, and no one went back to Greyweather again. My father never told this story until now. He said the last night they were there, before help came, he dreamed again. Only this time, when he woke up, he saw something move past the tent, a shadow taller than any man, walking toward the lake. He watched it step onto the frozen shore, leaving footprints in the snow, one by one, until it reached the water's edge. Then it stopped, and just before it vanished under the ice, it turned its head and smiled. Years later, when I visited Kenai myself, I stayed in a roadside motel near the coast. It was quiet, almost empty. Around 7:45 p.m., I washed my face in the bathroom mirror. When I looked up, my reflection stared back, but 5 seconds too late. I froze, breath locked in my throat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the faint sound of water outside my window, though my room was miles from the shore. When I looked out the next morning, I saw something in the wet gravel, footprints, leading from the shore toward my door, none going back. Sometimes when I drive past the edge of Kenai Lake, I still wonder if that shadow my father saw never really left. Maybe it followed the water, moving through the fog, finding new places to whisper from. Maybe that's why my father finally told me, not for peace, but as a warning, because in Alaska, the land remembers. And some things in the dark are not waiting to be found. They're waiting to be remembered.